Good evening, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Lee. I am the volunteer coordinator here at Anti-Trafficking International, and I am your moderator for the evening. Welcome to Let's Talk, an educational series from Anti-Trafficking International to help you stay informed about how you can prevent human trafficking, how you can spot possible human trafficking, what to do if you suspect trafficking, and how we can support victims and survivors. This is a quarterly series, and this is our first event, so we're glad to have you. To kick off this first event, we have a special message from our new CEO, Ann Basham.
Good evening and welcome to Anti-Trafficking International's first Let's Talk webinar. I'm Ann Basham, and I have the privilege of serving as the Chief Executive Officer here at ATI. I am so excited to be a member of this passionate, dedicated team, and my goal is to work alongside each of them and all of you to reach our goal to end human trafficking forever. ATI has been growing and seeing a lot of new changes in the last few months, and this webinar series is just one of them. I'm excited about every aspect of our new Let's Talk webinar series, and our topic tonight is trafficking in the age of COVID. Many people think that human trafficking is something that happens in faraway places to other people, but the reality is that trafficking happens in almost every county across the nation and probably in your neighborhood. Our job at ATI is to help people recognize what trafficking really looks like every day and save victims through education and outreach. I want to also thank our incredible team of dedicated volunteers whose hard work is making this series possible. I personally am thankful every day that they bring their enthusiasm and talent to ATI and do so many wonderful things to help stop trafficking. Education and awareness are foundational cornerstones here at ATI, but we can't stop human trafficking without you. We'd love to have you join our team. And throughout this webinar, we're going to share ways with you that you can get involved, from financial support to volunteer opportunities. I really hope you'll consider supporting ATI. Now over to our moderator, Elizabeth Lee.
Thank you, Ann. For those new to our organization, Anti-Trafficking International, or ATI, is a team of people dedicated to the defeat of human trafficking through uniquely targeted programs. Our goal is to stop human trafficking before it begins by connecting with the community. We seek to serve the youth, parents, and those on the front lines of combating human trafficking by providing them with focused resources developed by both survivors as well as experts in the field. We partner with people like you. Everyone plays a role in helping to end human trafficking, and with your help, we can eradicate human trafficking in our lifetime. We would also not be able to do what we do without financial support from generous donors like you. Tonight's event and all of ATI's Let's Talk events is free and open to the public. We are dedicated to connecting with and educating our communities about human trafficking, and donations are what allow us to do so. If you take nothing else from tonight's program, know that you are the one who can end trafficking before it starts, whether through donation of time or money. ATI has the tools you need. And if you enjoy tonight's program, keep an eye out in our newsletter for details about Let's Talk events later this year. If you don't already receive our newsletter, you can sign up at preventht.org or let us know at the end of this session and we'll get you squared away. Our next two topics will be announced on our website and in our newsletter, so stay in touch with us. We'll be sending you more information as we get closer to those dates. As you already know, today our topic is human trafficking in the age of COVID. And I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker, Bill Woolf, Anti-Trafficking International's founder and U.S. Department of Justice Director of Human Trafficking Programs. Bill has dedicated his life's work to combating human trafficking while serving As a law enforcement officer for over 15 years, he was able to assist in the rescue of over 125 victims of human trafficking and connected them with appropriate services to help them on their way to recovery. Not only did he assist in the prosecution of more than 50 traffickers, but also helped to transform the way law enforcement handles these types of cases. To read more about Bill's journey from police officer to Director of Human Trafficking at the Department of Justice, visit our website at preventht.org. Tonight, he will provide us with insight into the impact COVID-19 has had on the fight against human trafficking. We will have a Q&A period following our speaker's remarks. So if you have a question, please include it in the open chat feature. With that, let's get started. Good evening, Bill, and welcome to the program.
Well, good evening, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for that very kind intro. And I just want to say, thank you so much to the ATI team. I know there's a lot of folks kind of behind the scenes that have been doing a lot of work to make this come together. So very appreciative for that, and very honored to be the speaker for the first inaugural Let's Talk series webinar. I want to thank all of you too, all the participants, for taking the time on a Thursday night to come and to listen to this topic. Of course, we know human trafficking is not always a happy topic, right? It's not something that we always are excited to discuss, but certainly it's something that's very important. I learned about human trafficking in my role as a police officer over a decade ago. And it was really in working a case against gangs in the Northern Virginia area, MS-13, that I came across my first case. But the interesting thing about that story is that I didn't know what I was dealing with. It wasn't until I took the evidence, explained the situation to the prosecutor, that the prosecutor told me and my partner that we had a great human trafficking case. And our response was, what the heck is that, right? We didn't know. We had never been trained on it. And I think so often we just expect our frontline professionals to be trained and to understand what human trafficking is, but there still remains a lack of awareness and advanced training to respond to this issue of human trafficking. I was very honored to serve in the Department of Justice as the Human Trafficking Programs Director. We really worked across the country to implement programs, to utilize federal funding through grants, to be able to equip those on the front lines. But almost a year ago, we went into lockdown here in the United States and all over the world because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's had a real impact on human trafficking. And so tonight I really want to kind of to lay clear to you all, because when the pandemic first started and folks were going on lockdown, for the initial response or thought was, well, maybe this will reduce the instances of human trafficking. Maybe because people are at home and they're not getting out, particularly when we talk about sex trafficking and sex trafficking of children, that maybe this is a real opportunity for us to kind of push reset and be prepared for when we open back up. Although I have to tell you, we couldn't have been more wrong. Human trafficking has been on the increase since the COVID-19 pandemic started. In fact, the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is run by Polaris, reported that they had a 40% increase in crisis cases over this past year. And the needs for shelter for victims of human trafficking has nearly doubled. I think that is evidence of the fact that this is grossly increasing. Some of some of the advocacy groups out in the field are reporting that human trafficking cases have increased 185%. And recently, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children reported that 2020 was a record-breaking year, with more than 21.7 million reports of suspected child sexual exploitation. I want that number to sink in for a second. 21.7 million reports. So where is this trafficking going on? Where is this exploitation going on if many across the country are in their own homes? And the reality is that it's something that we've known for a long time. and the traffickers can leverage technology. They can leverage all kinds of different circumstances to be able to exploit people even in their own homes. I know when I was growing up, and probably for most of you, our parents would lock the doors at night, and that was to keep the bad people out, right? That was our protection, is to secure our home. But unfortunately nowadays, when we lock that door, the predators, the offenders, they still have a way to get into our home and to take advantage of the most vulnerable, our youth. And the COVID-19 pandemic has certainly increased the ability of these traffickers. Understanding that criminals are very, very nimble, right? They like to move and change with the times, and they will adjust their MOs, their methodologies for whatever the times may be. And so tonight, I want to talk a little bit about what are some of those increased risk factors and what are we really seeing. But I want to do it in the context of the three things that traffickers really look for. So understand, when a trafficking cuts across all races, ethnicities, genders, socioeconomic classes, and that's important to understand, because it really isn't about one or the other, but it's more about who can they take advantage of. And traffickers look for three things. One, they look for suggestibility, they look for vulnerability, and they look for suggestibility, accessibility, and vulnerability. Suggestibility means how easy is it to suggest, particularly to a child, that this is normalized behavior, or this is okay for individuals to be engaging in. And I know ATI has done a lot of great work, even in the Northern Virginia area, with some incredible prevention curriculum, partnering with the Fairfax County Public Schools, the Loudoun County Public Schools. And a lot of that curriculum was really aimed at taking away that suggestibility factor by really helping students and young people to understand that that threat exists. But as kids are not in school, as many of them are in a virtual school and they've had to modify schedules and modify classes, are they getting that same curriculum and that education? And I think that we're seeing all across the country that some of those extra programs, if you will, are being cut to try to meet the needs of virtual learning. And that's leaving our children more vulnerable. Accessibility means, can I, as a trafficker, get access to that individual so I can scout them out, I can manipulate them, groom them, and then control them? And again, the reality is that they do that through the internet, right? They do it through these cell phones that everyone has today. And they've gotten very creative about how they can do that. Not just social media anymore. Social media still plays a very big role in the recruitment and the grooming of young people into trafficking and exploitive scenarios, but really thinking about online gaming and other things that young people are doing just to stay in touch with their friends. I've got a 15-year-old son, and I know he oftentimes will do online gaming as a way just to communicate with his friends. But we have to understand and realize the risk is out there, and the risk is increasing because now the traffickers have more time to be on those platforms to be able to groom young people. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children estimates that 1 in 5 children will be approached by a trafficker at some point during childhood development. That's another statistic that I really want to sink in. 1 in 5 children will be approached by a trafficker. And so the question that I ask you is, what are we doing to equip our children for when that trafficker does approach them? Because it's no longer a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And so we really need to proactively, as parents, as community members, as professionals in the schools and law enforcement and all kinds of other hosts of frontline workers, we need to make sure that they are equipped to be able to identify and respond before it's too late. So we have that suggestibility factor, accessibility, and this is one of the reasons why human trafficking really is impacting every community across the country right now. because these traffickers have the ability to be so mobile, they're able to use the internet as a way to really manipulate young people into this lifestyle. And that last factor is vulnerability. And that's what I want to spend a lot of time on tonight. A lot of things make us vulnerable. We all have vulnerabilities. We all understand that the reality is that so many young people present with vulnerabilities. Now, when I was growing up, quite a while ago, we really didn't share our vulnerabilities, right? It wasn't something that we kind of put out there for the public. But nowadays, young people are sharing that more and more on social media. And the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated that situation, because again, this is now the only form or mechanism that young people have to communicate with their friends. And so now they're putting that information out there, and would-be traffickers, other people that are very technologically savvy, can get access to that information and leverage it against our children. And so with that social isolation, with so many schools being shut down across the country, and them not being able to have access to the schooling and the other things, the reality of what is happening is that our young people are becoming socially isolated. Now, we as people, some of us, like myself, tend to be a little more introverted. And my kids joke that, after I retire, I'll probably move up into a cabin up in the mountains away from people, right? But we are wired, as individuals, we're wired for that interaction, right? We need that interaction, and especially during childhood development. They need to be interacting and socializing with other individuals. And they don't have that opportunity when they're at home and not getting access to, to their friends and other social activities because of the situation with the pandemic. So that social isolation really is causing a great deal of depression. And so even in not necessarily our children, but in young adults, we are seeing addiction crisis like none before. We're seeing suicide rates increasing because we're not able to get out and communicate with, with other people and really have that social interaction. And that is making individuals more vulnerable to the lies of the traffickers, because that's what trafficking is all about, right? It's not the idea of a, nondescript work van pulling up on the street corner and kidnapping children. That's not what trafficking is, right? Most of the time, traffickers are using opportunities to lure young people into this lifestyle. When I say young people, I'm really talking about that age group between maybe 13 and 14 up to about the age of 25. And why do we include that group? Because we know that the human brain is still really developing until the age of 25. In fact, some studies now suggest that it could be even further in life. And that last stage of development in the brain is the executive decision-making function, right? That's what's happening during those last stages of development. And so these traffickers can take advantage of that. They know that these people are vulnerable, and when they're not having that interaction right now, they know that they're experiencing depression. We know that some of them may become addicted to drugs, and all of this serves as leverage, right? The trafficker can lie to them, offer promises, can offer to be that friend, to be that listening ear. When I was working cases as a detective, so many times I heard stories of young people that really, they were just having a bad day. Things weren't going right in their lives, right? Their parents didn't understand them, or whatever the case may be. And because of that, they became easy prey for the trafficker, because they could offer to give them what they weren't getting fulfilled elsewhere in life, right? And so that was really important, and has become even more difficult today. Now, I did say that trafficking cuts across all socioeconomic classes, and that's absolutely true. I have worked with victims and survivors that have come from very poor situations, all the way up to those that come from very wealthy families. But right now, because of what's happening with the COVID-19 pandemic, and we are seeing jobs being not having the opportunity to work and support their families, that poverty is also leading to increased homelessness, lack of resources, lack of access to services. And we think about those individuals that do come from the low socioeconomic classes and don't have access to high-speed internet, that don't have the opportunity to participate in a webinar like tonight, right? Or don't have access to certain technologies or other things, they then become even more isolated, right? And traffickers can use this lure. If I said to any of you, you know, hey, I could offer you a job where you would make $5,000 a week and it's really easy money, you really don't have to do a lot of work, I'd probably pique your interest, right? You'd probably want to know a little bit more about that. And I think that's really the reality when it comes to trafficking. They can target those in lower socioeconomic classes by promises of money, wealth, financial security, etc. We're also seeing right now with the pandemic, we're seeing a lack of access to services. And this is a huge problem. I had the privilege to serve as the principal deputy director at the Office for Victims of Crime within the U.S. Department of Justice. And really our role there oversaw programs upwards of $6 billion worth of programming for services for victims of all types of crime, but oversaw specifically a budget of $100 million for programs for victims of human trafficking. And when the pandemic started, because of the lockdowns and we were shutting things down and we hadn't really become proficient in utilizing, you know, personal protective equipment, we saw a lot of the shelters were starting to shut down as well. And so it's really a two-pronged approach, right? Or a two-pronged problem and a perfect storm, because the service providers are not able to keep their doors open and serve clients. And at the same time, because of the lockdowns, people can't get out of the home and get access to those services. Think about somebody, you know, we talk a lot about the grooming that happens online. We talk about sort of this third-party trafficker. But the other thing that we're seeing a lot of, and particularly seeing an increase now, is familial trafficking. What is familial trafficking? Well, it's when a family member, a mom, a dad, a brother, a sister, an uncle, exploits that child for commercial purposes. And right now, we're seeing it more and more online. We're seeing where parents who, you know, some do it because of the pure exploitive nature of it. Others are doing it because they're trying to make some money. Right now, we see these individuals being exploited. And again, traffickers have gotten very creative. We talk about the sex trafficking piece, and we typically think of scenarios where you have, you know, you're going to a hotel or something like that, sort of what we might consider to be traditional prostitution, although we get away from those words, right? The commercial sex component of it. But now what's happening is they are exploiting individuals online. And there's even websites that are out there right now that are very exploitive in nature. So young people can sign up, they can get an account, and then people are paying them to perform various sexual acts, right? And this absolutely qualifies when we think about the definition of human trafficking. So we're seeing that it moving to be more online exploitation, and these young people that are being exploited don't have the escape, right? Think of a young child that's being exploited. Historically, at least they've been able to go to school. They can interact with a teacher or a counselor in the classroom. And I know a lot of organizations have done really good work at equipping teachers and school counselors and psychologists to be able to identify, because they truly are on the front lines of child sex trafficking. They're truly going to be the ones that have the ability to identify that particular scenario before anyone else. But with the pandemic and moving to this virtual school, and where they're not interacting, you know, many kids are not on camera during their virtual classes, but really, could a teacher, is the training out there for teachers to be able to identify what trafficking or exploitation might look like in the virtual environment? What are we doing to equip those frontline workers to be able to identify that as well? So much work really needs to be done. And this leads to sort of that last point of the decrease in the ability to identify victims, because we're not having that one-on-one interaction with victims, teachers and other folks, and parents. Parents don't necessarily know either. I mentioned I have a 15-year-old, actually I have 6 children. He's the oldest, so I use him as the example all the time. And I was speaking to a group the other day and I said, right now as we're talking, my son is literally 20 feet away from me in the other room, and he's in school. He's doing his school. But I shouldn't have a false sense of security at that moment, because I don't know if he's talking to anybody else, if he's got his phone with him. So is he communicating with other people? What are those what are those threats that are out there in the virtual environment? And so a lot of people want to know, well, what do you do about that? How do you protect your child in that particular scenario? And it really comes down to the reality of the world today, and that is the parents are becoming the teachers. And we as parents, we have to be more engaged with our youth. We have to be more engaged with our children and have those hard conversations. Participated in another series. It was a training series specifically for parents recently. And, I was getting questions like, well, when is too young to talk to your child? Well, you as the parent are the only one that can really answer that question. And really my response to that is, we should be talking to children about safety and exploitation and threats that are out there in an age-appropriate way, early on. And so really you want to start that conversation early. You don't want to necessarily have the explicit conversation with them until much later on in their childhood development. But the reality is we should be having that conversation early with them, and it should be a continual conversation, because they're learning, they're growing, and they're being exposed to things that we may never even know about. I don't know if many of you know that the average age that a child is exposed to pornography in the United States is only 9 years old. And so again, the exposure and the time online is really becoming very problematic. And I noticed somebody had a question in the chat, a reference, do they mean that students are making videos of themselves performing sexual acts or live streaming? And yes, absolutely. They are doing that. And how are they being exploited online? Because they're being forced to do it by a family member is one scenario to make money, or they are simply doing it at the request of other adults that are then paying for those services. And by definition, that is human trafficking and online exploitation. When kids are posting videos, pictures, or live streaming instances that involve sexual acts or pornographic images, and somebody is paying them for that or paying somebody for those images, then that is in fact commercial sexual exploitation of a child. And so we're just seeing the massive increase of that. We're seeing and essentially we call that type of material, generally we call it CSAM, or child sexual abuse material, and we're seeing a massive increase in that. National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is seeing an increase where they are showing an increase. I think most recently they noted that it is up 97.5% from previous years. So again, we're just seeing such an incredible increase as the world is moving more and more online, and young people are not getting access to those services. They're not able to escape their exploitative scenarios. They don't know where to go to get help, and we're not providing that insight, right? We're not, as communities in general, we're not really letting them know where they're able to turn for help. And certainly we talk about the economic impact, right? Not only is it impacting families and individuals because they don't have the money, but also a lot of nonprofits are being impacted as well. A lot of nonprofits that are providing services, and so they don't have the funding to be able to continue to offer services. Or in the virtual world, they don't have the funding to sort of move into or adapt to providing services virtually. So there are opportunities to communicate and connect with victims of crime through virtual components, but it's very expensive, right? You have to secure, there has to be a very secure platform, and there's a lot of considerations, and many organizations are really just not in a position to be able to respond to those, to those types of situations. There was a study done by the University of Toledo where they talked about the fact that traffickers are particularly drawn to children who post expressions of fear, emptiness, and disappointment, such as, quote, "nobody gets me," or, quote, "my life sucks," or other things like, "I need to get out of here." They're looking for these children. They are trolling, for lack of a better word, throughout the internet and these various different social sites. One particular social media site that's become very popular is TikTok. For those of you that are not aware of what TikTok is, you can post usually very short videos, and the whole idea is to get more followers on that platform. They're oftentimes very similar to like YouTube. If you have enough followers and enough likes, then you can actually be paid and gain money off of that. And so young people get take riskier and riskier, they become riskier on those various platforms. They do things that really lure in and attract various different traffickers that are out there, right? These people that want to exploit them online. And really think about, once these traffickers, and what they're doing during this period of lockdown is they're collecting a lot of blackmail information, right? So if they get this, while child sexual abuse material like images and videos and live streaming certainly does qualify as a form of trafficking, the end game or the end goal of the traffickers is to collect that information and then to use it to blackmail individuals once the lockdown happens. And so a lot of the professionals that we work with in the field are predicting that once the lockdowns stop, once we start opening back up as a country, that we're going to see a lot of children that start to go missing. And we've started to see that in various places. I think Florida, it was a jurisdiction, I think Miami, Florida, once they opened their schools back up, they realized that they had several students that hadn't been attending virtual school. There was no way to really check in on them. But then once they opened the doors and kids started going back to school, a lot of those kids were missing, and nobody knew about it. Why the parents didn't report, we don't know. There's investigations. And if you follow the news, you'll see that in particular, the U.S. Marshal Service has been conducting a lot of operations around the country right now, really focused on finding missing kids, because they are going missing, but nobody is really talking about it. It's because these traffickers are luring them away, luring them into situations, paying for their travel to put them on a bus, and moving them, across the country to other locations. And I've heard too many stories about how that is happening all across our country right now, where they continue to lure these young people in, they groom them for a period of time, and then take them and move them somewhere else. This is particularly relevant right now when they're spending so much more time online, right? And I mentioned in the beginning the fact that many of them are not able to receive some of the prevention curriculum that has been put in place. And so really it's thinking about how can we within our own communities start working with our school districts, with our other frontline professionals, to really implement some of this training, this prevention training for our youth in a virtual environment, right? Why are we not providing that training to them and really adapting and adopting new practices to be able to do that? So some of the other virtual platforms, just to kind of highlight some of them, we talked about TikTok. Of course, Instagram is very popular. Facebook, not so much. That's more of my generation. But even things like Pinterest, Snapchat, Twitter, games like Roblox and Fortnite. If your kids are on any of those platforms, there have been documented cases of children being groomed or trafficked in all of those various different locations. It gives these traffickers immediate access to a wealth of information about the child, and they can see what a child's posted online. They can engage them in what seems like casual conversation, and really they're just using that opportunity to learn more about the child, to learn more about what is happening in their lives. And it's an opportunity to exploit them, to develop blackmail against them, and lure them away from their home or from their parent. We're seeing a lot of, I mentioned the addiction crisis in the beginning, and so traffickers, once they actually physically get their hands on these individuals, then they're able to use illegal narcotics to be able to get them addicted as a control mechanism. And so we're seeing that continue to grow, as well as so many young people don't have access to services that could get them out of a drug addiction scenario. No one is closer to the front lines of preventing human trafficking than parents. And so really this is a call for parents that are out there to really engage with your children. Kind of mentioned it earlier, but I just want to reiterate because it's so important, is that parents need to protect their children by educating them about the dangers online. Most of our children are innocent, which is great, right? We want our children to be innocent, and we don't necessarily want to ruin their view of the world. But I think that we would be remiss to not make the effort to really try to educate them and engage them about what those threats are. We need to pay attention to their internet habits, right? Who are they talking to? Who are they communicating with? Do we set limits in our own homes? Are our children, do they have time limits? Screen time. Screen time is not just because sitting in front of a screen all day is bad, but we also want to make sure that we're not giving that unsupervised access for traffickers to our young people. We need to make sure that we teach them how to surf the internet carefully, right? What are things that you share and that you don't share? I've worked alongside an incredible colleague of mine, Chrissy Fowles, who runs an organization in Prince William County, Virginia, called Y Incorporated, who does a lot around internet safety. And the work that they continue to do, both in the schools and outside of the schools, is proven to really change lives. But one of the things that she shared with me, and I've experienced as well, is that a lot of these young people, they just don't know. They don't understand that that threat is there. And so we have to take it upon ourselves to really be the educator when it comes to safety, online safety, right? Parents should always keep their child's computer or tablet in a common area when they do their online work. When you have multiple kids that are in school right now virtually, that gets a little bit difficult. But we have a rule in my house: anything that is an electronic or a screen, it goes into one room, in the evening, and that's where it stays. They're not allowed to have their devices in their rooms or have access to any of that information, because again, we don't know. We need to be in a position where we can constantly monitor that. And there are various tools and resources that parents can use and can install on their children's devices. I'm certainly not here to endorse any of those, but there are some devices like Bark, which is a really great one. It actually is kind of cool. It leverages some artificial intelligence to be able to scan everything that your child's doing online. And instead of you reading the substance, instead of you having to read like every text message that they send, the system, the BARC program, will actually alert you if they feel like something's going on, right? If they detect that there's discussion around something that could be sexually exploitive or suicidal ideations or anything like that. So there's a lot of different types of tools and things that are out there that you can leverage as a parent to really protect your child. And again, just sort of regulating that. Having those open and transparent conversations early and often about technology, how to use it safely. Parents can really help arm their children against those threats for when the trafficker does approach them or there's some other form of online exploitation. We can also really pay attention to how our child is reacting. We don't have to be reading everything that the child's doing, but if we're in the same room and we're just observing, we can observe their facial expressions. We can observe, something that may bother them or make them feel uncomfortable just by their body language, right? There are children, we can certainly know when something's going on. And then it's incumbent upon us as parents to not ignore that at that moment, to not just kind of blow it off or brush it off, but really what's important at that point in time is to be able to engage them in a healthy conversation about what it is that's bothering them, right? Or what the situation might be. And again, these are difficult conversations to have, right? But we want to always be prepared for that, and we don't ever want to avoid those conversations just because they are uncomfortable. So COVID-19 has brought about truly a marked increase in the online sexual exploitation of children. Schools, teachers, and parents really need to prioritize educating children in the midst of their virtual learning. And information is available to help parents. I know ATI in particular has a parent coalition to end human trafficking that has resources and can provide support for parents on how to have these conversations. But we really need to make them aware because children are very trusting. Oftentimes I can remember working cases back in my day as a detective where a young person would be exploited, become a victim of a crime, unfortunately. And in the course of doing that particular interview, one of the things that we would learn from that child is that they felt like the person that they were talking to on the other line was another kid, was the same age as them, or whatever the case may be. And really it was, a 45-year-old man who was grooming them and getting them to send sexually explicit materials to that individual. The sooner that schools reopen, it's really going to be the better for our children. The sooner we can get them into the schools, but we have to understand and we have to be prepared that once we start opening up the doors again, once children start getting out into the world, the reality is that we are then going to have a massive flood of children that are in need of services, children that need some level of intervention because they have been isolated for so long, because they have been in that particular scenario. And it's finally an opportunity for them to get out and interact with an actual professional, somebody that can identify and provide intervention for that child. We also should anticipate that many children will go missing when we start opening back up. And so we need to be prepared for that too. And again, having these conversations. It's not only about protecting our own children, but it's about encouraging our children to look out for their peers, instilling a sense of community responsibility for them, and helping them to be able to understand that if they see something that doesn't seem quite right with their child, then they need to, they need to report that. They need to have that conversation with their parent or another trusted adult that's out there. And so that's really the key, is opening these lines of communication not sugarcoating these issues, talking about the realities that are out there, and understanding that the internet has become an even more dangerous place for our children and young people because of the COVID-19 pandemic, coupled with that social isolation that exists, the fact that we've seen an increase in poverty and homelessness as a result of the pandemic as well. And then even the identification piece, thinking about things like if you were in fact going to try to identify a victim of trafficking, when we're out in public, many people are wearing masks, right? And so it makes it much more difficult for law enforcement or anyone else really to identify maybe a missing child or somebody that's being exploited. It's very difficult not being able to see facial features. Our law enforcement officers, one of the things that we were trying to address at the Department of Justice were many of our human trafficking task forces were no longer allowed to be doing proactive investigations because they weren't allowed to be out in the community interacting with folks because of the pandemic. So it's really complicated the situation. It's complicated our response to human trafficking, and we really need to be preparing ourselves for when we start opening back up, because we're going to see an increase in the exploitation that's happening offline as a result of the exploitation that's happening online right now. So with that, I think I will pause and turn it back over to you, Elizabeth, and hopefully we can get some questions answered for the folks tonight.
All right. Thank you so much, Bill, for sharing that insightful, however shocking information with us. Before we move to the Q&A, however, I'd like to ask Candy Arthur, our Director of Development, to say a few words. Candy?
Thank you, Elizabeth. As she said, my name is Candy Arthur, and I'm the Director of Development for ATI. I know a lot of you right now might be feeling overwhelmed by the information you just heard. I know I was the first time. But I also know you're probably feeling enraged, determined, inspired. So what next? Act on those feelings and join the fight to end this modern day slavery. And let us at ATI help you help our children. This can be as simple as following us on social media and sharing our posts and encouraging others to do the same. That simple act not only raises awareness, but introduces our solutions to those who might not otherwise know. Perhaps a teacher who knows our curriculum could help her students, or a police officer who would like to attend our academy training or use our National Human Trafficking Information Center. Or maybe a parent who knows something is wrong with her child but doesn't know what to do until she sees our parent coalition. Every share reaps rewards in this battle. It's as simple as that. But let's go one step further. To ensure ATI has these tools at the ready, I encourage you to consider investing in us financially. Become an ATI champion for as little as $25 a month, or make a one-time donation of your choice. Make a donation in someone else's name or memory. Sponsor a fundraiser. Encourage others to do the same. Be a part of a movement to save our children. Let's use tonight's momentum to say to traffickers, no more, not my child. Get involved, stay involved. Visit our website at preventht.org to learn more, or text a donation now to 930-212-3456. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for being a part of the solution. Elizabeth?
Yes. Thank you so much, Candy, for sharing those thoughts and ideas with us. Now we can move on to the question and answer part of our presentation this evening. We have been receiving some really great questions. And so Bill, they've been coming in through the chat, and I've been capturing them. So What we'll do for about the next 25, 30 minutes is go through as many of these as we can. All right. The first question is, are there hotspots or regions that provide more insight to authorities that help them to catch traffickers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, what we call, in the field, we call it the prevalence, right? What is the prevalence, and where are the hot spots of human trafficking? We don't know exactly. What we do know is that it tends to, of course, follow the money. And so urban centers or densely populated, wealthier parts of the country tend to be a draw for the commercial sexual exploitation component of trafficking. But that's sort of the back end, right? And so we talked a lot about the grooming. We talked about the scouting out of young people, and that can happen anywhere. And another disturbing trend that we're seeing as well is what we call peer-to-peer trafficking, and that is where you've got a 16-year-old that's trafficking another 16-year-old. And so it becomes much more difficult. And young people are seeing and getting these ideas online, right? They're seeing it, they're seeing that sort of the commercial sex lifestyle is being glamorized through movies, on various different musicians and artists are glamorizing that lifestyle. They see it on YouTube videos and all kinds of other things. And so what's happening is that you have young people thinking this is an okay way to do things. Remember, we talked about, those three things that traffickers look for: suggestibility, accessibility, and vulnerability. Well, pop culture is really helping with that suggestibility piece, right? Suggesting that this is normalized behavior or it's okay behavior. And that really becomes problematic. We also know that young people that come from homes where they witnessed violence or domestic abuse, where they were, an abuse victim themselves prior to, become more vulnerable as well, because then they just really don't have the proper defenses, and they don't necessarily understand that the trafficking piece, the commercial sexual exploitation, is wrong. And that's really a call to us to be doing that level of education with our young people, to explain to them that this is not okay, and we have to overcome that pop culture. So I know it's kind of a long way around to answer that question, but we do see hotspots in dense areas of the country, more wealthier areas of the country, and then also the reality is we do see hotspots in areas where there are high concentration of migrant populations, because traffickers can leverage their lack of understanding of the laws in the United States, their social isolation. Many times we have unaccompanied children that are coming into our country, and they don't have the support mechanisms in place, right? They don't have the family structure to provide them with that support, and that makes them much more vulnerable to traffickers as well.
Thank you, Bill. Another question is, are we recording this session, and will we share it?
Yes, we are recording the session. We will post it to, I think the plan is to post it to a YouTube page, and you all are welcome to send that out and share it.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you. All right, I know we've talked a bit, you talked a bit, well, quite a bit about the dangers of applications like TikTok, Instagram. Do you have any final words about the dangers of these things? And
no, I think we just need to be aware of the reality, right? I think that parents need to educate themselves on what exactly these games are, or these platforms. They need to understand them and how they work. I know, and young kids are playing some of these games, very young children. You know, toddlers can figure out, you know, games like Roblox and those types of things. So I think we have to be, you know, many parents don't necessarily want to get on those various platforms or have to worry about it, but it's not, you know, again, when we were kids, the types of games that we played were board games, right? And parents knew what we were playing with, or even the advent of video games first came around. You know, it was a controlled environment, right? They didn't have that access to the internet, so there weren't these potential bad actors that were able to access our children and communicate with them. And I think the other thing that we have to understand, again, I think it bears repeating, is that traffickers are very methodical. So it's not like they're going to approach our child online and say, hey, send me, you know, sexually explicit images. That's not how it works, right? They build this friendship, they build this trust over a period of time, and then they move into the exploitation component. So really, what do we need to be doing? We need to be talking to our children about who are they playing with. I can just share just some of my personal rules that we have in our home, and that is, you know, they're not allowed to play. The kids are not allowed to play in public areas within the game. They're only allowed to play with other family members or people that we know, right? And when it's people we know, it's somebody, either myself or my wife has met in person, right? We know they are a real human being and they're a real, you know, 12-year-old and not some, you know, 45-year-old that's trying to exploit our child. They also know some of the other rules that we have as far as online engagement, especially for the younger ones, is they're not allowed to have any outside conversations, whether it's through text or any of the other apps, unless, again, it's somebody that we have met, right? So again, you know, when we were children, it was a much different environment, but I think we can apply some of the same rules. When I was growing up, I wasn't allowed to go over to a friend's house unless my parents had met their parents, right? And that was a standing rule. Same kind of thing, right? It's just in a virtual environment. And I think we just have to adjust our mindset, apply those lessons learned, you know, from younger days in life, and just adapt them to this virtual environment. And know, I think the most important thing is know that the threat exists. It is very real.
All right, thank you. How prevalent in how prevalent is human trafficking on sugar daddy websites and apps?
Yeah, so for those that don't know what a sugar daddy website is, and there's various different forms, and it's presented in various different ways, but the sugar daddy is somebody like an older male who's willing to pay, typically a younger female, although it can be in reverse, usually college age, will pay them a lot of money, and it's supposed to be for companionship, for dating, but really there's the expectation of sex. The problem with these is they're extremely exploitive, and many people will argue, well, you know, the person's probably an adult, maybe they're like 19, 20 years old, and they're consenting to engage in this, right, is the argument. Well, we have to be very careful about that argument because we apply some of the science, right? And the science tells us, again, like we talked about earlier, the way we are as human beings, we need that connection, we need that socialization with other people. Well, when it comes to physical intimacy, we also require a connection to that individual, right? We need to be physically intimate with somebody. We have to have an intimate connection, typically an emotional connection, you know, a physical attraction or whatever. If we as human beings are forced to or feel compelled to engage in a sex act with another individual, but we don't have that connection, our bodies can still perform because that's what they are made to do. But our minds process that event very differently. And I think that's what we need to really understand. The way the science now tells us, the way that the brain interprets a commercial sex act is the same way that the brain interprets a sexual assault. So even though that young person that, may be quote unquote consenting in that particular scenario, their brain is processing that very differently, and they are building up trauma. And it could very much lead to a lot of complications later on down the road. It could lead to, instances of PTSD or other things. There is a lot of argument from the legal standpoint as to whether it qualifies as an act of trafficking. But I can tell you just from a practical standpoint, it's not a healthy relationship, and it's becoming more and more prevalent among particularly college-age kids. There's also another website that's very popular right now, just along those same lines. It's called OnlyFans, OnlyFans.com. OnlyFans is, we talked earlier about that live streaming component. It's a membership organization. You go and you get your username, and then you go on there, and then you can find people that you pay them to perform various different sexual acts with themselves or with their partner or whatever it may be. And it's basically pornography on demand. And that particular, that particular site, there's people that are making a lot of money. But again, it's very exploitive in nature, and our young people hear about it and they think that it's easy money. Even 5-6 years ago, before it became really popular, as an investigator, I was working cases where young people were getting on those various apps, or even dating apps, lying about their age, getting on those apps, and then being commercially sexually exploited. And I think one thing, I just want to add one thing, there's a lot of conversation right now around various things like Pornhub is made a lot in the news, or these things like OnlyFans. It was TikTok falls into this category, or did fall into this category. What I think people need to understand, so often I hear it still today, but I definitely heard when I was a police officer, I'm like, well, if it's so bad, if that website or that app is so bad, just go shut it down. Go shut them down. Well, this is another complication of the internet, right? Is if that server, if what's actually running that website is not physically in the United States, law enforcement in the United States don't have jurisdiction. So now you're dependent upon foreign governments, like say Greece, to actually respond to that and to take those things down. So it's truly not as simple as, well, just send in the FBI or just send in Homeland Security to shut it down. It doesn't work like that, and we don't have the ability to be able to do that. And so again, even when we shut them down, even when some do get shut down, others will continue to open up. And it's not, it becomes a game of whack-a-mole. And we're really if we're not getting out in front of this through prevention and having these conversations and equipping our youth to understand that why these things are wrong and the impact that it could have, we'll never solve the problem. It will just continue.
All right, well, thanks, Bill. And these great questions are continuing to roll in. The next one I'd like to share with you is, so we talked about parental rules for electronics. How do you suggest leveraging trust with your children and empowering them to identify and approach the parent with these at-risk issues, as opposed to some of the other concepts we've talked about this evening?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, right? So the first piece of that is, I love that the participant asked about, empowering our young people, right? Because that's really what it should be about. We need to move away from the do it because I said so sort of mantra that many of us probably heard from our parents, And I think really the best defense against online threats is for our young people to understand what the threat is, right? And certainly we can have the conversation around, the moral aspect of it or whatever the case may be. But I think we also need to paint a very realistic picture for our young people too, so that they can understand that, what these things evolve into. And when you send a picture online, I don't care how much you trust, that individual, that you lose control over that picture. It is now out there, for the world, and there's no getting it back. So I think it really is about empowering them to protect themselves, empowering them to protect their peers. And part of that, as just mentioned, is about helping them to identify the threat, but then to feel comfortable coming to their parents and having that conversation, right? So how do we do that? Well, a lot of it is us initiating the conversation, right? Because kids are probably going to feel uncomfortable, right? And I remember, a couple of years ago when I had to have, the talk with my son, that was probably the most uncomfortable thing I've ever done in my entire life, right? Kicked indoors as a police officer, chased bad guys, got in fights, all this other craziness that I did. And probably the scariest thing that I've ever done in my life was to have that conversation with him, right? It's uncomfortable. But I think we have to have it, and we have to have it often, because it keeps the door open. And you can't just say, you can't keep it very closed-minded, but you have to really give them an understanding that if they come to you and they have that conversation, that you're not going to respond in a judgmental way, that you're not going to respond, with a disappointed tone, because that's going to prevent them from coming to you. If they think that you're going to have a negative reaction to that conversation, particularly negative towards them, they're going to avoid that conversation until it might be too late or may never have it, right? So we need to make sure that we keep that door open, that we're constantly having that conversation with them. And it extends outside of parents as well. I think those of us that are in the community, whether you're police officers, teachers, counselors, school psychologists, whatever your role is, social workers, or maybe you work in a youth program, at your in your faith community, or you work in a program, like the Boys and Girls Club or something like that. I think you can encourage folks to talk there too. Prior to going to DOJ, when I was, we had developed a prevention program for the Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Washington and implemented. And a lot of it was really focused around how do those counselors have that conversation with youth. And it really opened so many doors once they were equipped, with that particular group. And the door was open to have those conversations. I'll give you another quick example. When I was a detective, one of the most effective ways for me to identify potential victims of trafficking was to go to the school and have a student assembly. And for me to stand up there and just have a very frank conversation with young people about what the threat is, define it for them, because many of them don't know, right? Many of them don't know, and that's hard for us to sometimes understand too, that a lot of them don't understand that what's happening to them is wrong, or understand that it's not their fault. There's a lot of self-blame when it comes to human trafficking and sexual exploitation. And so really being able to provide them with that open forum to disclose that, it will ultimately save lives and get them to disclose.
Awesome, thank you. And you mentioned the boys clubs and girls clubs. We did get a question from a Girl Scout troop leader, and this person is in a rural community and would love to host an event to help educate parents and youth on these same dangers. Where can I turn to get more information on doing something like this?
So I might recommend Anti-Trafficking International. Certainly have a lot of experience. The organization has a lot of experience going out and doing community events for youth groups, speaking to youth in a very age-appropriate way, and also doing programming for parents as well. So I think, you know, I'd probably encourage them to visit preventht.org. And there's a place on there where they can request a speaker or request an event, and encourage them to do that.
Great. Sort of in line with that question, we received a question from a viewer who would like to know how we get our human trafficking curriculum into schools.
So that probably would require a follow-up conversation just to understand, you know, the role the participant plays. You know, if they're a parent in that community or a teacher or an administrator. You know, I would say that we're happy to work with them. So if they want to send a message, you know, info@preventht.org, and somebody will reach out to them and chat about that offline.
Great. All right. So continuing to get great questions. Here's one that I'd like to share with you. How would you suggest a strategic approach on providing services in communities as it relates to human trafficking? What are your thoughts of a teen drop-in center to address needs?
Yeah, so now you're talking my language. I love strategic approaches. I think that, you know, some of the best things that you can really do is you build a stakeholder coalition, right? So I think that's sort of your first steps, is figure out who within that community you know, needs to be at the table, and that can be that's a whole host of folks, right? So it can be, you know, it should be your law enforcement agency, it should be your social service providers, your child protective services, your courts, you know, your court services personnel, and then looking at what other organizations are operating within that community, right? So Boys and Girls Clubs, there may be trafficking specific nonprofits. You know, if you were somebody like in the Prince William County, Manassas area, having somebody like Chrissy Fowles with Y Incorporated come, you know, and be a part of that conversation. And it's really the strategic part of this, and is really figuring out what resources you have in your community. And resources are not always financial resources, right? It's about all the different pieces, get them all at the table, get everybody on the same page, and then you can use that to create something that is much more sustainable, right? And so I think a drop-in center is a fantastic idea. I know I live in Northern Virginia. I know many parents pre-COVID, and I'm sure it will be post-COVID, you know, many parents are commuting downtown. You know, they're not getting home until late. And so you have this incidences of what we call latchkey kids, right? These are kids that are coming home, getting off the bus, and going home to an empty home. They're particularly at risk for trafficking. And in fact, you know, we talked about sort of the low socioeconomic classes being affected, and also the high socioeconomic classes. The higher end ones tend to be those latchkey kids, right? But I think that really having a location like a teen drop-in center gives youth a place to go. It gives you an opportunity to engage and build life skills with young people, provide them with opportunities, but it also is keeping them busy. So we're not concerned about, you know, where they are, who they're communicating with. It keeps them off screens, you know, for that social interaction piece, right? And it's supervised, and it's just, I can't say enough about, you know, teen drop-in centers, or even honestly, you know, adult drop-in centers, community centers where people can go and socialize. I think that's one thing that the pandemic has certainly opened our eyes to, not that we didn't know before, but certainly that we know all too well now, and that is really the requirement for us to have that social interaction for our mental health and well-being.
Thank you. So I have a question that is focused on foster parents. Do any of the parent trainings focus on foster parents? And then thank you for all that your team does.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the foster care system certainly is an amazing program. But there are a lot of problems with the foster care system, and certainly with people being trafficked as a result of that. In fact, a case that I worked many years ago with a young lady, she was taken out of her home at the age of 13. She was put into foster care. She was in 3 different foster care homes until the age of 17, and she was trafficked by all 3 foster parents. So I think you have 2 problems with the foster care system. One, you have foster parents that need to be able to identify that exploitation and respond appropriately to it. And then you also need to boost up the foster care program to ensure that there's not traffickers, right? And so there's a lot that can be done there. I know ATI has worked with foster care programs and has trainings specifically for foster parents, because it is a little bit of a unique dynamic, right? When you're a foster parent, it's a little bit different. And I think there's some other considerations that need to be discussed. But also ATI has done a lot of work directly, with Department of Family Services, and can continue to provide that support and that training to those folks. So I would encourage them, if that's an area of interest for them, to reach out to ATI, to send a quick email, and somebody can circle back with them and figure out what next steps might look like.
All right, so I know we've only got 4 or 5 more minutes left, and again, so many, we've got a lot of questions. Bill, if you agree, we're going to capture these questions and we'll post answers on the website. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay, but we'll continue on for as long as we have. But this really isn't a question, but I don't know if we want to just spend a minute or 2 talking about the Student Advisory Council. And they have created and posted some videos that may be of interest to our audience.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great touch on very quickly. So certainly get more information from the ATI website. But the Student Advisory Council, we talked earlier about empowerment, right? Particularly empowering our youth. And ATI, I think, does a fantastic job of doing that by offering them leadership opportunities through the Student Advisory Council. And that council really advises the work of the organization, plugs in on a lot of different projects and programs, offers high school and college age students the opportunity to really engage with their peers. And so it gives them, again, that opportunity to participate in different projects, host school campaigns, and they've done a series of videos, educational videos, short, concise, but again, that peer-to-peer education. And I think you can access those both on our YouTube, on ATI's YouTube page, as well as on the website. So I'd encourage folks to check that out. And if you have youth that want some leadership opportunities, they're always accepting applications, and I know they'd love to talk to somebody about that.
All right, great. So let's see. I just want to, I guess, ask real quickly. A viewer had mentioned Fortnite and Roblox. Is your message about these capabilities the same as we've been discussing, or do you want to add anything extra on them?
Yeah, so Yeah, so we talked a little bit about those various various different programs, and they're just online games that a lot of kids can play, but they have the ability to communicate, whether through voice communication or chatting back and forth. And there's a lot of bad actors that are using those platforms to try to groom children.
Yeah. All right. So I'll kind of summarize a couple of questions, but we've had users or viewers rather ask about, how to engage their elected officials, how to engage school districts, school boards to become more active on the issues of human trafficking.
Yeah, so I think it's really important that we are communicating with our elected officials, because truly they're the ones that will be able to leverage some of those resources, right? They can certainly support, we talked about that stakeholder coalition building within communities. Certainly having their backing is really important. Having, our elected officials allocate resources within the community, right? So a lot of, social services and of course our law enforcement, they're tasked with so much, and they're going to be responsive to you all, right? Because that's who they work for. You elected them. And so, having regular communication, letting them know that trafficking is important to you, asking them what they're doing in their community, to support that, like what is going on, and thinking about what can be done better, I think is really important. So I always encourage folks to have contact with their elected officials.
All right. What changes in the law, in laws need to be made to address the profit motives behind human traffickers?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think there's a lot of discussion in the field right now about the issue of demand and demand reduction, and what can we be doing, right? So also looking at laws around asset forfeiture, so seizing assets of traffickers. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. There are several policy advocacy coalitions around the country that are working both on the federal level but also the state level to ensure that we can strengthen those laws to de-incentivize trafficking. And really I think a lot of it too is about making communities inhospitable to traffickers. And so we can find ways to do that, certainly through the criminal justice system, but we can find other ways within the community as well by putting up various safeguards.
All right, so I'm going to try and summarize several things for our final question. I think we've discussed that surprisingly so, children are trafficked at school, but we wonder what are the signs to look for when how can we look for grooming situations and the signs of manipulation and so forth? So
that's difficult to summarize, and I think we got 2 minutes left. I would maybe encourage your team, Elizabeth, to be thinking about hosting an entire webinar on that. I think it'd be a fantastic topic that we get a lot of interest. I'll try to summarize, particularly in light of COVID and how we might look for that in the virtual environment. I think increased secrecy, our children not wanting us to know who they're talking to online, keeping devices from us. If we catch them constantly, like deleting messages or changing contacts around, that secrecy thing is something that I would really be paying a lot of attention to. We're going to also notice, changes in behavior. They're going to be pulling back away from the family, not wanting to engage, not wanting to come to, family dinner. And I cannot express how important family dinners are. I'll just throw that out there. So we'll start to see them withdrawing from the family. You may start to see them, becoming more materialistic, wanting to wear makeup and dress up quite a bit, even when they're not leaving the house, right? That should be a sign for us, like, who are they dressing up for? Why is that? What is really going on? You know, and then so we just need to be very, very conscious and cognizant of that. The other thing is really just, you know, knowing what they're posting on social media or what they're doing. I think we should encourage our kids to, you know, not be sending videos. And I know, you know, some folks might get mad at me, particularly in the schools, you know, but I've heard some instances where teachers want kids to send pictures of them, you know, performing different exercises or doing different things. My kid's not sending a picture of him working out, you know, or sorry, a video of him working out to a teacher. I mean, that's weird, right? So I think we just need to be monitoring those behaviors and making sure that, you know, we are aware and we're engaged. And when they start withdrawing, pulling back, changing their attitude and response towards things, that should be a red flag for us. And then we should already be having those conversations, but then that's just another call to have more conversations.
All right. Well, thank you, Bill. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. I think that actually was a fantastic summary to a really insightful evening.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. I just, again, wanted to thank everybody for being here tonight. It really was a pleasure. I know it's late to talk about these issues. But also, you know, again, Elizabeth, thank you to your incredible team that, you know, did so much work to prep for this and has been working kind of behind the scenes during the course of this webinar. Truly fantastic to work with you all. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. And again, I'd like to thank you, Bill, for joining us tonight to deliver great insight into the challenges presented by the pandemic in the fight against human trafficking. Thank you for your work in this field and for all you do. And thank you to all those who joined us online and for your questions and comments. For more information about this subject, you can visit our website at www.preventht.org. You can also reach out to us at info@preventht.org. If you or someone you know could benefit from parent support or other trafficking intervention services. After tonight's event, you will be receiving a feedback form to the same email address you used to register. We'd appreciate it if you would take that opportunity to tell us what we did well and what we can do better for future Let's Talk events. We appreciate your financial support to continue the work that we do. When you invest in ATI, you are investing in youth and saving lives. And if you were interested in what you heard, please tell your friends and colleagues, because when it comes to preventing human trafficking, it's everyone's business. Thank you again, all, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.